Welcome to Empowering Innovators, the YouTube series where we'll talk about innovation the startup way. Today I have with me Avishai Trabelsi, the CEO of Quicargo. Let's jump immediately to entrepreneurship.
Come on, be aggressive like you are.
Why did you become an entrepreneur?
I don't know anything else. Third generation. All my life I was a part of entrepreneurs, and for me it was like just a normal thing to do. And once I was employee for 2 years, and it was the most.
In a family company?
No, when I
outside.
Yes, I was running the family company, and then I studied accountancy. I did like 2 years of internship. It was the worst time of my life. Then I stepped back to the business of the family, and eventually started Quicargo afterward.
Yeah. So, what were the most important things which you learned in your younger life, when your dad was an entrepreneur? Were there some takeaways that you saw? Wow, I want to have this freedom, creating things out of nothing myself, or how was it at home?
Yeah, it was. He invented everything, every day, new things within our industry, and he always looked. And every day I felt from him a new energy that created because of new ideas and new things that he thought that he should do, and he did eventually. So that was very strong part, and it just inspired me as well to do it by myself at some point.
Right, and that was in the same domain as you're currently active in?
True.
In transportation, right?
Yeah, started in a farming,
yeah.
So different businesses in the agriculture industry, and then we needed to move the crop, so we started. He started slowly to deliver it, and eventually all the business shifted to a transportation company.
Right, and at a certain moment you thought, I see an opportunity here to disrupt or to basically support the way transportation is done. Can you give us a little bit of insight what Quicargo is doing and?
So basically, after the terrible experience with the finance world, I decided to start to quit and go back for the family business, which was back then 25 transport companies providing road transportation services for big companies in Israel.
Yeah.
And it was a very nice company, increase every year nicely, but the problem that the margin were very slow, very low. Yeah. And once I started to understand what's the problem, I saw that the cost increasing drastically every year, and we couldn't really increase the prices for the customers. And when I asked the customer to increase the prices, they said, "I'm sorry, with all the respect to your father, many years of good service, and yourself, still every day 3 transport companies approaching us to give us better prices, and now you're asking me to increase the prices."
Doesn't work.
So that was just a dead end in my side. And the only thing that I saw that I can do is to utilize our existing trucks in a better way. 50% of our trucks were empty when they came back after the delivery, and that doesn't make sense. I tried to find solution to combine with other companies, or to think about solution how I can fill those trucks, and I couldn't find a solution that I can implement without a lot of cost of IT or sales. And I looked for a solution in Europe. I couldn't find anything. But what I heard from other companies that they had the same exact problem. So lack of drivers, increasing fuel cost, congestion. And then once I understood that it's a global problem, and it's not only in our family business, I decided to bring back the keys to my father. He wanted to retire, so he didn't like it at that point, but. He understood, and I started Quicargo. And what we're doing in Quicargo is we're unlocking the capacity, or the empty capacity of the truck, and make it accessible for businesses to use it. And by that, we're creating more margin for transport companies because they have more goods in the existing truck, and the companies that using those trucks getting better prices and more flexible solution. And of course, for us, it's less congestion and pollution. So it's a win-win-win situation.
For everybody in the
Implementation is very difficult because it's very traditional companies. So you need to implement and to actually disrupt the way they're working today. And we are working on it hard every day. But for me, I'll never forget the difference between the existing market to what we're trying to do. My father, and of course I learned a lot, but for him, when the truck is driving, even it's empty, also it's empty, it's okay, because it's not in the warehouse.
In the garage.
And for me, that's the other way around. I prefer to see all the trucks here without spending money if I'm not generating revenue. And that's exactly the differentiation between the existing or old generation of the transport companies to the place we need to be.
So you found a pain in the market and started thinking, how can we solve that for all parties involved?
It's not the pain. I believe that Quicargo is an other possible solution for optimization. It's the only way to proceed. It's not the pain. It's just live or die.
Right. And you started in Israel.
Yeah, we tested in Israel. We wanted to. I wanted to use what I have. So I needed to sell some assets that I had and saving, because my father didn't directly wanted to invest. So I used our trucks, and I developed with two partners, Elad and Roni, the first product. And the idea was to test it and to see how the reaction of the customers.
And how was it? Did people immediately get it, or they didn't get it, or?
It was terrible. It was very bad.
In what sense of the word? Nobody wanted to talk to you, or?
No, it was good. So we saw the willingness of the companies, and the need was there. But I was sure that I thought that I knew what will be the best proposition for the market. So we developed amazing application that wasn't relevant to the market. So when we introduced it to the customers, they said, yes, but we are not using smartphone. We are using a walkie-talkie. So what do you want me to do with the application now? So we bought cell phones. So, and then all our investment and time we invested on finding good deal with the cellular company and to change and to replace broken screens. Disaster. But it was the most expensive but the most valuable lesson I had in that matter. So we analyzed everything, we learned. So the good thing was that we saw that the need is there, but the execution were poor. And I looked, and at that point I needed to say goodbye to some of the companies and some of the employees, and we stayed more with the product and the IT. And I traveled 3 months. I traveled 3 months in different markets,
talking to customers, sensing the
experts, universities, anywhere to understand how we can solve this problem. And it was very nice to see that the problem and the need is there, and we saw it in Israel. But now it was to build together with the market the proposition in the product.
So more customer centricity, really looking at their pains and how you can solve them.
So every step we did in the product, from the very second generation, it was based on focus groups in the shipper side, which is the businesses, and the carriers are the transport companies. I think this is why I'm very proud in the progress we did in the last 2.5 years.
So you built the MVP, it basically failed. You started listening to customers, you started traveling. Eventually you decided to move to the Netherlands from Israel.
Because of Startupbootcamp, of course.
No, but well, you got selected eventually for the Smart City program in 2016. I still remember that many of the mentors said to me, this will never work in the Netherlands. And many people said it will never fly, it doesn't work, the market is saturated. We still said, maybe the idea might not work, but we think these guys have an amazing team and they will figure it out along the way. which I guess you did. But you decided also to move to the Netherlands. What was the reason for you, first of all, to apply and to eventually move to the Netherlands?
Yeah, so I traveled 3 months and I spoke with many companies, including the Netherlands, and the reaction of the company, I was amazed by the way transport companies are working here. So they're already using technology, they're already willing to cooperate with network of different carriers. You will never see it in Israel or other countries that I traveled. So this is one part. The entrepreneurs in our industry are willing to try. Okay, that's significant in our industry. And the second thing is the hub of logistics. It's if you look about Rotterdam, Schiphol, you're sitting on it's called the blue banana. So if you take this triangle, it's about 30% of all the goods in Europe. And if you combine it with the very small geography, for startup is very good, so you don't need to spend a lot of time to educate and to get to the first prototype, or at least to make a good case study. So everything together, we decided to come here, and then we applied, and very quickly with some discussion with you and some other mentors, we decided that would be the right way to start.
Yeah. So did you eventually also pivot here during the 3 months that you were in the program, being even more customer-centric, or was the basic application already fulfilling the need?
Yeah, it was always as all my saving went to this mistake, I'm very sensitive to that part, and I always remembered not to fall in love in the product and to fall in love with my customers and what they need. So I try to bring it to the table always with my employees, with my customers. I'm always trying to make it the first priority. But yes, we changed a lot, and we're still changing constantly every day. We're learning a lot of things. One of the biggest movement were from bidding systems. So we let the market, each partner to decide what's the price of this transaction. And eventually we went to dynamic pricing model. So based on our data, we are finding the best price that it should be good for both sides, and it's really quickly. So you don't need to wait for the ping pong of reaction of both sides. And that's really made the big growth.
Hey, if you look at the team that you brought to Amsterdam and the team that you have today, we all know that the founding team and the people that you hire, eventually they make the business, right?
True.
What has changed, and what have you learned in making sure that you bring the right people on your founding team, but also when you're scaling up quickly, that you avoid bringing in the wrong people and you bring in the right people?
Yeah, it's also, I learned it from to do mistakes, and I hired some people that I was lucky to have a lot of good people around me, even although some of them weren't the best match directly, but I learned a lot, and we're still I don't have any, I have some bad experiences, but in general very positive, and also the people that left the company. Yeah. But what I learned that as a startup you need to have people that can survive in a very hectic situation and dynamic environment. Because if you're coming from a corporate, or you need to stick to a very specific plan, you will never survive. You won't be able to get such a big changes in a days. And that's exactly the people that stayed, the ones that were willing. First, everyone needs to connect to the vision, and then they needs to have the specific skills that they are responsible of. But the most important thing that they can be dynamic and disrupt every second what they decide yesterday. At least to think,
keep
to
the flexibility,
and
to
so that's crucial.
Stay tuned. Second part of my interview with Avishai will be released next week on YouTube.